and we're honored to have with us today the U.S. Energy Secretary, Mr. Dan Brouillette. So welcome, sir. We will hear first from Mr. Brouillette, and then we will have a Q&A session with Dr. Fatih Birol, our Executive Director. The whole session will last about 45 minutes. This session is being live streamed on all of our channels, on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and on YouTube as well. We welcome also your questions. You can send those to bigideas@iea.org, and we will accommodate those time permitting. So without further ado, I will turn now the floor to Dr. Fatih Birol, our Executive Director. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jet. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, thank you all for joining us today. I am delighted to welcome you once again to our Big Ideas Distinguished Speaker Series. We have started with this series only a few years ago, and we had the pleasure to hear from government leaders, from scientists, thought leaders around the world. And the previous speakers included the former President of Ireland, Mary Robinson, the Australian Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, or recently the 2018 Nobel laureate, Professor Bill Nordhaus, just to name a few. Now, our aim for this series is just to open our eyes to new perspectives, different perspectives than we ourselves think, and challenge our own thoughts. We have, of course, been doing this series in physical terms. We were very happy to host our speakers at the very a nice boardroom of the International Energy Agency. It is the first time we are going to do it in virtual terms, and for this we have a special, very special guest. It is Mr. Dan Brouillette, who is the 15th Secretary of Energy of the United States. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for accepting our invitation.
Thank you, Fatih.
Thank you. The topic of today's discussion is something I think we all agree that the energy security is a critical issue. And the topic that we have chosen today is energy security in an insecure world. I think why we all agree that energy security is important, none of us can deny that the world is nowadays an insecure one. And I think this is a very timely topic, energy security in an insecure world. We have seen that the COVID affected the entire economy, social life, and everyday life as well. But the energy sector got a big shock. Our analysis show that the global energy demand this year is going to decline, that it has never been the case in the history. Big decline of global energy demand. Investments, again, declining about 20%. Global energy investments declined from 2019 to today by 20%. Big decline. And global emissions, carbon dioxide emissions, huge decline, about 8%, which means the decline of emissions this year will delete the increase of the emissions in the last 10 years globally. Big decline in emissions, but in my view, this is not a reason those emissions decline to celebrate, because it's not happening as a result of innovation, right developments in the energy markets or government policies. This is happening because of the economic downturn, as well as the premature deaths of thousands of people around the world. Now, as International Energy Agency, what we have done in this period of time to have a damage assessment of the COVID, what is happening in the oil markets, gas, renewables, electricity emissions. And after making this assessment for the world and providing information with all the countries, now we are working on how to get out of this situation in the best way. Here, we have a couple of worries, if I may say so. One of them is the electricity sector. What will happen with the electricity sector and electricity security? I think, Mr. Secretary, I am sure you agree with me that we all understood how essential the electricity is for our lives, especially in the last few months. And we also see that the many governments around the world are putting together stimulus packages, and how they are going to design, what kind of energy policies are included, those will be critical for all of us. Now, it is, of course, a great pleasure and privilege to have the U.S. Secretary of Energy, in addition to Mr. Dan Brouillette's great expertise and command of energy issues. We all know that the United States is a leading country in energy around the world in many areas, including oil and gas, being the largest oil and gas producer of the world. And I would like to congratulate Mr. Secretary and his colleagues for making great efforts to contribute to the stabilization of the global oil markets recently, Mr. Secretary. But the United States is also a great leader in terms of the renewable energies or emission reduction. For example, our numbers show that the last year, the largest, in fact, this year, the largest increase in the renewable energy came from the United States. Largest increase in renewable energy came from the United States. In terms of the renewable energy contribution, we see that the renewable energies, their contribution to electricity over to coal for the first time since 1885 is the second largest contributor after natural gas. Finally, on the CO2 emissions, many of us may not know that the decline of emissions in the United States since year 2000 is about 1 gigaton, 1 full gigaton, which is the absolute decline by any country over that period. Of course, we all know that we all have a lot of room for improvement in many areas: electricity, emissions, renewables, and the others. And we are very much looking forward to hear Mr. Secretary's perspectives, his thoughts about the U.S. energy sector, but also beyond that for the world. So, Mr. Secretary, may I also once again thank you for joining us today from Washington, D.C., and looking forward to hear your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Birol, for that kind introduction. It's great to see you again, and I'm grateful to be joining you as well as everyone else who's here today in a virtual capacity. Fatih, I think when we last met in March, I don't think any of us realized at the time that it was going to be the last of our international travel for quite some time. But it's great to see you, if only virtually here. So kind regards, and I'm told that you just received an award from the country of Brazil that I am to congratulate you on, and I want to do so formally here in front of everyone. Congratulations, it's quite an honor to be recognized in that fashion, and you've earned that very much throughout your years of work at IEA and beyond that as well. You've been a world leader in energy economics, and we look to you for guidance each and every day. So thank you for your leadership, and congratulations on that tremendous honor that's just bestowed upon you by the country of Brazil. Congrats. I look forward to seeing you again soon, Fatih. You know, by any measure, I think we are going through some very challenging times. The coronavirus has had a devastating impact on the well-being of our citizens, and it's presented unprecedented challenges to each of our economies. And clearly, we've seen a dramatic economic contraction and a huge decline in global energy demand. And this has led to a huge rise, obviously, in energy supply. And that was exacerbated by the collapse of OPEC Plus negotiations in early March. This lethal combination led to a shockingly rapid collapse in oil prices. And according to the IEA, your organization, Fatih, we're also witnessing the largest drop ever in energy investment, more than a 20% decline in 2020, or a reduction of roughly $400 billion, with the oil and gas sector falling by fully 1/3. So make no mistake, I mean, today's crisis is in fact global, and it transcends any one nation, and it requires a swift and decisive response from all of us. So what has the United States been doing to meet this crisis? Well, we've been, conducting what we refer to as an all hands on deck approach against this coronavirus, using our national laboratories here at the Department of Energy, for example, working day and night to find a more effective treatment or potentially a vaccine for this virus. And President Trump has met the oil oversupply issue head on by facilitating, I think by any standard, what has been a historic agreement between the Saudis and the Russians in the most recent OPEC conversations. And under the agreement that was reached in March, global oil production has been reduced and markets have been made more stable. And I was pleased to see the announcement this past weekend that they're going to extend that agreement for at least another 30 days. In addition to that, we've been working to negotiate contracts with domestic producers to store their crude oil in our strategic petroleum reserve here in the United States. Last month, we awarded 23 million barrels of storage capacity. And as of mid-May, roughly 25% of that oil had been delivered to the SPR. And we're anticipating further deliveries through next month as well, including by our friends in Australia, following our first of its kind agreement with them last week. Also under the president's leadership, President Trump's leadership, we're carefully and responsibly opening up our economy. And thanks to this action, oil demand is beginning to rise. Oil prices have now stabilized, and we're already seeing the potential signs of powerful economic comeback for the United States and indeed for the rest of the world. And that leads me, I think, to the central question that faces us today. And working together, what should our energy policies be? I think we can agree on our ideal energy goals. Ideally, we want energy prices to be stable enough for producers and affordable enough for consumers. Ideally, we want energy supply to be abundant enough to avoid shortages and diverse enough to meet the full range of our energy needs. I think ideally, we want energy production to be done in a way that protects our environment. And ideally, to your point, Dr. Birol, earlier, we want the electricity that we generate to be delivered as reliably as we possibly can deliver it. Now, when we consider all of these aims, the problem there is obvious. How do we meet all of them at once? Many people believe today that we can't, but I believe that in fact we can. And it certainly won't be easy. But before the coronavirus arrived, one thing was absolutely clear. The United States was making tremendous strides in that direction. Indeed, in an incredibly short period of time, the United States became a nation that produced an astonishing range of energy sources as abundantly and affordably and as cleanly and reliably as any other country in the world. We became the world's #1 producer of oil and gas. It's #2 generator of wind and solar power, and it's unmistakable leader in reducing energy-related carbon emissions. Now, how do we do that? We did it by what I will call, what I will call the American energy model. The focus of our model here in the United States is the well-being and security of our people. And we advance that goal through the objectives of economic growth, energy security, and environmental improvement. For economic growth, we rely on the free market principles, on open, transparent markets that are grounded in the rule of law, where contracts are honored and where energy technologies compete on a level playing field. And we rely strongly on deregulation, which unleashes innovation. And none of our progress could have happened without innovation. Let's admit that. Thanks to innovation, because of innovation, We're generating record amounts of zero emissions renewables and are poised to advance emissions-free nuclear technologies like small modular reactors and microreactors. And again, thanks to innovation, we're poised to make our fossil fuels even cleaner through carbon capture, utilization, and storage, and what I would refer to as revolutionary coal plant designs. For energy security, our focus is on reliability and resiliency, as well as on diversity. At stake is literally everything in our society which depends on the reliable flow of electricity and the fuel mix that's needed to ensure it. That is precisely why we are working with the private sector to deal with cyber attacks on our grid. It's exactly why we build more energy infrastructure, and through the President's Bulk Power Initiative, why we aim to secure the supply chain for all of its components. And it's why we aim to revitalize the most reliable form of energy by implementing the recommendations of the President's report on restoring America's competitive nuclear energy advantage. For environmental improvement, we believe in bottom-up agility rather than top-down dictates. Some people argue the opposite, and I understand that. They insist that government knows best, and they should favor some companies through subsidies while penalizing others through taxation or perhaps additional regulation. But we believe here in the United States that the market knows best and will proceed accordingly by making regulations and rules of the road rather than barriers that block the road to innovation and progress. We believe this approach is exactly what's made us an economic leader, an energy leader, and as Dr. Birol points out, an environmental leader. Indeed, because our utilities listen to their customers rather than take direction from above, the United States is set to have the largest increase in renewable energy year over year at 10%, but still has some of the lowest energy prices in the developed world. Just months ago, before the virus reached US shores, this American energy model was working wonders, benefiting not just Americans, but men, women, and children all across the globe. And I believe that by reaffirming that model, we can and we will see progress return. But I also believe something else. I believe that as we work together, we will do even better. So as I conclude my remarks, Dr. Birol and all of the IEA family, let me make a pledge to all of you today. We will work side by side with our friends, with our allies, and with our co-laborers on the road to recovery and progress. And we will do it every step of the way. We will work with the G20. We will work with Dr. Birol and the IEA. We will work with like-minded countries, and together we will all prevail. Yes, these are indeed hard times. They're heartbreaking times in many ways. But as we rise up together, I'm absolutely confident that we will emerge from this crisis together, stronger, healthier, and more secure than ever before. Thank you again, Dr. Birol, for the opportunity to join you. Thanks for the opportunity to be with all of you, and I look forward to our discussion today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary, for this very comprehensive speech. Very inspiring. Thank you very much for that, and especially finishing this with a pledge for international cooperation among the countries around the world. Thank you very much for that. It is very much appreciated. And I can tell you, in the meantime, my colleagues told me thousands of people are following your speech and our discussion here. It is great to hear that interest. Now,
you have a strong record of drawing a big crowd, Dr. Birol.
But thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. I am only with 6 colleagues here in the agency for now, and they are all, many of them are, of course, following this discussion. Now, dear colleagues, I am going to start to ask some questions to Mr. Secretary, but in the meantime, as our press officer told you, if you have any questions, please send it to the email address bigideas@iea.org. bigideas@iea.org. So, Mr. Secretary, may I start with a question? I am, of course, as one of the esteemed members of the IEA family, we are following your work at the DOE closely, as we do with the other ministers. From your perspective, Mr. Secretary, what do you see as a key major achievements after you arrived to Department of Energy?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for that question, Dr. Birol. It's been a very productive. I've been here now almost 3 years. Came here to the department to first serve as the Deputy Secretary of Energy. At the time, Secretary Perry was in this role as the leader of our department. And he and I worked together on a number of different issues, many of which you assisted on, and many of the IEA members were part and parcel too. And, you know, when I look back on it, I look at the dramatic increase in not only oil and gas production here in the United States, but the dramatic increase in the export of those products from the United States. Not only did we become the largest producer of oil and gas, but we became a net energy importer for the first time at the very beginning of this year. That, of course, was interrupted slightly by the coronavirus pandemic, but I suspect that that's going to return very shortly. For instance, with our natural gas exports, they increased 5-fold over the period of the last 3 years. That's a tremendous accomplishment for America. I think it's a tremendous accomplishment for the world as well. You know, as many countries have moved to lower carbon intensive fuels for their energy needs, natural gas serves as a perfect complement to those types of environmental goals. And we're proud to be a part of supplying the world with that important resource. So, you know, when I look across the last 3 years, that is probably toward the top of the list. I'm also proud, as you mentioned in your opening comments, the amount of work that we've done with renewable energy here in the United States. We're working very hard in our 17 national laboratories to move to the next generation of things like solar power. We think that's very, very important. Many of the technologies that we've seen in the solar area today, the solar arena today, are becoming somewhat old. You might even use the word antiquated in some cases. But we're looking at newer technologies that will leapfrog those, make the product more efficient, make the provision of energy through the use of solar panels much more efficient, much more productive. And then we want to complement that, obviously, with battery storage that allows us to integrate these intermittent types of electricity generation into our national grid here in the United States, but also grids around the world. So it's been a very, very productive 3 years, and we look forward to continuing the good work that's been started.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary, highlighting some of the achievements with the DOE. Now, you mentioned, and I also tried to mention, the energy security, how important it is. But the topic has another dimension, which is the insecurity of the world. When I look at the insecurity of the world, one of them is at least from my point of view, is the cybersecurity, which is a key issue for our grids. I mean, leave aside the other parts of the economy or our social lives. For energy, cybersecurity is definitely a key issue, we believe at IEA. What are your views on cybersecurity? Do you think is a threat to our energy security, Mr. Secretary?
Yes, I do. I think it's not only a threat to the United States of America, but it's a threat to the world. I think when you look back at the 2019 Worldwide Threat Assessment, you see exactly that. I think the words in that document are exactly accurate. It's very, very important that we take seriously some of the nations that would intend to do us harm here in the United States, but perhaps do other nations harm as well. And we must all work together to block that sort of activity in the worldwide marketplace. Here in the United States, we've taken some very aggressive actions. I mentioned earlier our 17 national laboratories. We currently own the fastest supercomputer in the world, actually the two fastest supercomputers in the world. We're using that type of capability here within our own department, combining it with the use of artificial intelligence to find solutions to some of the cybersecurity risks that we face here and others face around the world. And we're willing to share those technologies with our allies and with our friends around the world as well. It's a very serious threat. You know, I can't begin to imagine what would happen if an adversary or a rogue nation or just a rogue actor anywhere in the world would attempt to shut down the electricity grid or shut down the electric generation facilities during this pandemic. I mean, imagine what would happen if the lights went off in a large city like New York City or London or Paris or any large city, as these hospitals attempted to deal with the patients that were coming into their doors each and every day. It's a very serious threat. We take it very real. We're also going to the next level, though. Our president here in the United States just issued an executive order that forces me or directs me to look at the supply chain. And what we're going to do is begin by looking at some of the transformers and some of the equipment and infrastructure that makes up the bulk transmission grid here in the United States. And we're going to begin by looking at some of the what we refer to as the power marketing administrations here within our own department. But we hope to work with the entire U.S. Electric utility industry to ensure that the supply chains for this important industry are safe and secure. So I'll be working with our Secretary of Defense, others, the Secretary of Commerce here in the United States, to identify pieces of equipment that could potentially be vulnerable to cyber attack, could potentially be vulnerable to a supply chain risk. And we'll be advising our utility industry as to what are good vendors and what are perhaps not so good vendors. And we hope over a period of time to eliminate that risk from our entire grid.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. At the IEA, we also see the cybersecurity as one of the potential threats for the electricity security, which is, in our view, as important as the oil security, gas security, and others. Now, Mr. Secretary, you mentioned a few minutes ago the low carbon energy sources, and one of the developments in the United States which worries me is the situation of the nuclear energy. So as we all know, nuclear energy is providing electricity generation without carbon. But we also know that there is a aging fleet in nuclear in the United States. And there is an issue of the lifetime extension or new builds. There's a big challenge. As you mentioned, the emission numbers are going down, but in the absence of if we lose this nuclear, which is a major part of the US electricity generation, these trends may not go in the direction they were going. What are your thoughts about the nuclear energy's future or the challenges it's facing in the United States and beyond?
Well, you know, Fatih, I think you're absolutely correct. I mean, nuclear has to be part and parcel to any environmental goal that we set here in the United States, and I would argue for any country in the world who is truly serious about reducing their carbon footprint or achieving goals that they may have set in the past. It is very difficult for me to see how a country can meet those goals without the use of nuclear power at this point in time. There may be some point in time where it's replaced by a futuristic technology that we've not yet developed or other changes in the energy marketplace. But as we sit here today, and as we look at the world as we know it today, and as we look at it for perhaps the next few decades, nuclear has to be a part of the equation for all of us around the world. And in the United States, we are committed to nuclear energy. We are working very closely with our industry and our regulator here to ensure that we have life extension programs in place. They're appropriate, they're safe. As a matter of fact, later this week, I'm going to be traveling down to a nuclear facility in the southern part of Florida, down around the Miami, Florida area, to visit a facility that has just been granted an extension to operate its facility for 80 years. And we think that's appropriate. You can do that very safely. We want to see others do that. I think I'm looking at a number here. It says here in the US, 88 of our 95 reactors have received approval of their first 20-year license. And to date, 22 reactors, which represents nearly a quarter of the United States fleet here, are planning or intending to operate up to 80 years, like the facility that I will visit in Florida later this week. We think that's a good thing. We think that's appropriate. We want to see more of that activity occur. We're also going to push very aggressively to develop the next types of nuclear technology. So, you mentioned earlier in your comments about smaller reactors, micro reactors, small modular reactors, reactors that use different types of fuel, reactors that can utilize perhaps, some of the spent fuel that's currently in the marketplace. There are a number of different ideas that are moving into the marketplace today. We want to see them advance. We want to see them get financed, and we want to see them come online as quickly as possible. Because again, it's a tremendous source of baseload electricity. It's very safe, it's very secure, and it meets our environmental goals that we have set here in the United States.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. We are receiving a lot of questions from our viewers, but I would like to, before going to those, I would like to ask one follow-up question. Talking about, again, the low carbon energy technologies, there is another one which you mentioned briefly during your opening speech, which is the carbon capture, utilization, and storage. This is also a very important technology, at least I believe so, in order to find a happy marriage between the fossil fuels and the climate goals, the emission reduction. So what are your views on the carbon capture, utilization, and storage in US and beyond, Mr. Secretary?
We strongly support the use of this type of technology. We helped with many others develop some of the technologies that we're seeing coming onto the marketplace. So we want to see them advance even further. Importantly, in the United States, our Congress determined that it would incentivize the further development of this technology by the creation of a tax credit, which is known in the tax code or amongst the tax lawyers as 45Q. And I'm happy to report that our Treasury Department just recently completed its work on the final regulations of the final rules around that statutory language that the Congress passed some time ago. We hope that will encourage industry, encourage companies who are looking to take advantage of that credit to move forward with these types of investments. And we hope to see more of this technology come online. It aids us in the United States. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, we have what our president refers to as an all-of-the-above energy strategy. And all of the above to President Trump and to myself and others in the energy policymaking world here in the United States means exactly that. It means all of the above. It means all forms of energy. So yes, that includes fossil fuels like coal and LNG. We think the use of CCUS in this case makes the utilization of those types of fossil fuels much more efficient. It makes them much cleaner, obviously. And we want to see these industries adopt these important technologies.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. We are getting questions from several ambassadors, ministers, and press. I would like to give you a few of them, if I may. Japanese Ambassador Okamura, how do you see the risk of underinvestment in oil as a result of the COVID-19 outbreak? What are the challenges coming from the underinvestment in oil?
Well, what concerns me about the decline, the economic decline and the loss of demand for refined product in particular, like diesel and jet fuel, gasoline, is that, it obviously leads to a potential situation where we have the shut-in of wells here in the United States as well as other parts of the world. And over an extended period of time, that's obviously detrimental because some of these wells cannot be reopened and they won't be as productive as they were in the past. So I think it's very important that we reopen the economy, we reopen it safely, appropriately, obviously, but quickly. I mean, we have to begin to get back to what I think Americans feel would be some sense of normalcy. And I'm sure in Japan, for instance, and other places, their citizenry feels much the same way. The one thing I am encouraged by, at least here in the United States, the development of the technologies that have led to the unconventional plays that we see here, the shale industry in particular, is that it allows those industries to scale up and down very, very rapidly. So while we're starting to see some declines in production, again, because of the reduction in demand, We know that when this demand curve comes back, some of this industry is going to come back very, very fast. So I'm optimistic about their future. I do think we're going to see the production of oil here in the United States increase at some point in the future. We're going to see the production of gas increase as well. And I do think in very, very short order. So I think, from my own perspective here at the U.S. Department of Energy, it's incumbent upon us. We talked about innovation earlier. It's incumbent upon us to continue that drive toward innovation and to continue to innovate new technologies that create efficiencies in these important industries.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. We have about 6-7 minutes. I will have 2 more questions. And then I will ask you if you have a final thought to share with us. Again, as I said, we are really overwhelmed with so much interest for your speech, Mr. Secretary. I have to apologize from those who asked so many questions, but going to from the Japanese ambassador to the Polish minister, Kurtika, how to find the right balance between economy, environment, and social dimensions, Mr. Secretary?
I'm sorry, Fatih, I didn't hear the first part of the question.
How to find the right balance between economy, environment, and the social dimension of the energy?
That's a very important question. I think, as I mentioned earlier, it's finding the diversity of energy supply. That's how we balance these things out, in my personal view. I think it's how we do the best job at balancing those important concerns of the citizenry. There are parts of our country here in the United States that, for lack of a better way to describe it, they oppose or they would prefer not to see certain forms of energy being used. It's important that we have the diversity of supply that we have here in the United States, so that they have choices. If they want to use nuclear energy, they can. If they want to use solar energy, they can. If they want to have their electricity produced by natural gas, they can. And it's very important that we provide that supply, because that diversity of supply, because it provides the balance that I think is necessary all throughout our society. For those who are interested, and my good friend in Poland, welcome. I don't know if you can see me, but I look forward to seeing you again very soon. We had some very constructive conversations around the use of nuclear power and nuclear energy. And I'm very proud of the fact that just this week, our organization here in the United States, which was formerly known as the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, it's now known by the 3 letters DFC, just removed a restriction on lending to facilities or countries that want to develop nuclear power. It's finding that sort of balance and being open to diverse opinions, being open to the diversity of supply in the energy space, that I think will help us find the right balance over time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. So we had a question from an ambassador, Japanese ambassador, a minister, Polish minister, and then one question from a media, from journalist, Claire Farrant. Claire Farrant is senior reporter for Climate Home News. She is asking, Mr. Secretary, Mr. Brouillette, you mentioned that the United States will work with like-minded countries to advance stability and security of the global energy market. Would U.S. consider reviving the Major Economies Forum on Climate and Energy to this end? Is United States, do you have such plans to revive the Major Economies Forum at this stage?
Well, I look forward to joining you in July to have, I think, some of these initial conversations around climate policies around the world. Look, I think, in the United States, we are committed to a clean environment. We're committed to technologies that allow us to utilize energy resources in the most efficient and clean manner possible. And we're going to continue to do that. But as we do that, we're going to urge our colleagues and our allies all across the world to allow each nation to take its own approach to this very important goal. We will continue to resist or to, issue concerns about top-down approaches from governments, be they, country governments or perhaps, regional governments that would dictate from the top down what certain outcomes should be. As we talked about here in the United States, we've increased our energy production. We've grown our economy over a period of, the last 15 years. all at the same time reducing our carbon footprint from energy-related sources by 14%. And I think that's a very important record for people to, to be aware of. We're proud of it here in the United States, but we also want to share it with the rest of the world because we do believe, as I mentioned earlier, that this type of an approach, this model, if you will, can allow both things to occur at the same time. It can allow your economies to grow very rapidly, and you can achieve the environmental goals that you have set out for your respective countries. So we're fully committed to that. Fatih, I know that you're going to host a meeting in July. I look forward to joining you to have some additional conversations there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary, for mentioning this. I mean, for our viewers, on 9th of July, we are organizing a IEA Clean Energy Transitions Summit. And we are very happy to have Mr. Secretary Dan Brouillette, Japanese minister, Brazilian minister, the European Commission Vice President Timmermans, COP26 President, the UK minister, more than 20 ministers around the world, and covering about 70% of the global energy consumption and the CO2 emissions. We are very much looking forward to that, and we see that many other leaders are also going to join to that meeting on 9th of July here. Looking forward to host all of these ministers and the government leaders, and like yourself, Mr. Secretary. So, Mr. Secretary, I thank you very much, but would you like to share your final thought for us, for our viewers, for the IEA colleagues around me here and following you through their computers and others? We have, again, my colleagues are giving me the numbers. Thousands of people are watching this event, which is a record number for us. Thank you very much for that. But would you like to have a final thought to share with us, Mr. Secretary?
Only it's an honor to be with you, Dr. Birol, such a celebrity. You draw all of these people to this one event. It's just amazing to me to watch you in action. But thank you for your good work. Thank you for all of the folks at IEA and all of the work that each of you do on behalf of the energy industry around the world. As I mentioned earlier, and as I'll say again, we count on you each and every day. We look forward to your advice. We look forward to your wise counsel. And we use your products to make policy decisions, not only here in the United States, but with our allies all around the world. And to all of the folks who are watching and listening in, all of my colleagues, all of my energy minister colleagues around the world, I look forward to seeing all of you very, very soon once we get on the other side of this pandemic. And again, Fatih, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. And again, thank you for all the good work that you do in your leadership of the IEA.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary, for joining us today. As the International Energy Agency, we are doing our best to have a world which is energy world, which is much more moderner, much secure, and much cleaner. Working with the United States and other 39 members of the IEA family, it's a great, great honor for us. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary, and thank you very much for following us through your computers, iPhones, and others. And I wish everybody a very nice afternoon or evening.